Good morning. Good to be back with you today. Appreciate Eli and Mackenzie filling in for me last week. We had a great trip over to Freed-Hardeman University and visited up there and getting ready for Ava to go there in the fall. And so we were glad to be away for a little while and always good to be back home. Hope you are all doing well this morning. It's great to be together for worship today. If you're visiting with us, we're so happy that you are here. Hope that you'll stick around after services, give us a chance to get to know you a little bit better and let us know how we can help you. We're going to talk about this question this morning: what will you do with Jesus? And the reason we need to talk about the question is because it's an unavoidable question. There's no way to bypass it. If you're confronted with Jesus, you have to ask, what am I going to do with this man? Even atheists recognize this. The French humanist Ernest Renan, who lived in the 19th century, he was no friend to Christianity. But in his book, he said that all history is incomprehensible without Jesus. And to tear Jesus' name from this world would be to shake it to its foundations. He decided not to believe in Jesus, but he didn't try to skirt the question, what will I do with Jesus? It's an unavoidable question. C.S. Lewis explains that in his book, Mere Christianity, saying that we should think about this. Jesus forgave sins. And he didn't just forgive sins committed against him personally. He forgave all people's sins. And only God can do something like that. It's one thing for you to step on my toe and I say, I forgive you for stepping on my toe. Or stealing something from me and I say, I forgive you. It's an entirely different thing for you to step on someone else's toe and I forgive you for hurting someone else. Or stealing something from someone else and I forgive you for stealing someone else's things. That's something that's just preposterous for a normal human being to do. And yet Jesus did that thing, and even when he did it, people never accused him of being foolish or being prideful. In fact, they saw him as a humble, lowly man. And a lot of atheists who don't believe in him see those examples of his forgiving sin and don't charge him with conceit or pride. They may say something like, I respect Jesus. I don't really believe that he was the Son of God, but I like his act of sacrifice and humility. And this is a man who forgave not only sins committed against him, but forgave people of sins they committed against other people. That's in C.S. Lewis's book, Mere Christianity. You think about a person like that, how can you avoid the question, what am I going to do with this person? Am I going to believe him or not? Lewis goes on to say, you don't have the choice of saying, well, Jesus was a great moral teacher, but he wasn't the Son of God. You only have three choices, and I'm sure you've heard this before. You can either call him a liar who was out to intentionally deceive people, or you can call him a lunatic who sincerely believed the claims that he made, but he was wrong, he was delusional, or he was who he claimed to be. He was the Lord. And Lewis said very effectively, those are the only three choices you have. In other words, you're not going to avoid the question, what must I do with Jesus? What will I do with him? You have to face that if you're a reasonable person. This question is asked in Matthew chapter 27, verse 22 by Pontius Pilate as Jesus is on trial for his life. And he asks the crowd, what shall I do with Jesus who is called Christ? And if you look at the general context of that question, there are several answers that are provided there. Peter in chapter 26 denied him 3 times. Went out and wept bitterly, even though he was a disciple of Jesus. Judas Iscariot betrayed him and afterwards went out and hanged himself in remorse for what he had done. The Jews envied him, and Pilate recognized, according to verse 18 of Matthew 27, that was the reason why they delivered him over to be crucified. They envied him, they were jealous of him, and they sought to destroy him. Pilate's wife had a dream the night before this question was asked and sent a message to her husband saying, have nothing to do with that man. She was afraid of him. Pilate himself didn't want to deal with the question. He washed his hands of the matter and said he's innocent of it. but in doing that, he answered the question as well. Simon of Cyrene carried his cross. The robbers on either side of him, according to Matthew 27:44, reviled him. We know that later one of those thieves was penitent and received grace in his dying hour. The centurion who presided over his crucifixion actually believed in him. When he saw the way that Jesus died, he said, "Truly this man was the Son of God." All of them answered the question in different ways. And that's the curious thing. You must give an answer. Everyone must deal with this question when confronted with Jesus. But we answer in different ways. And so what I want to explore from our text, which will be 1 Corinthians chapters 1 and 2, what I want to explore is the reason behind the different answers. Why don't we all come to the same conclusion? The evidence is before us. What makes the difference? Is it your level of intelligence? Is it your power? Is it your station in life? Or is it something else? This is what Paul deals with in 1 Corinthians, and the question we're dealing with today. What determines your answer to the question, what will you do with Jesus? Let's notice in the first place, your answer does not depend on your wisdom. A lot of intelligent people fall on either side of the question. Some people say, I will reject Jesus. Some intelligent people accept Him. Your intelligence doesn't determine the answer. Paul explains that. If you look at 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 18, he says, the word of the cross is folly to those who are perishing. It's foolishness. But to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the discernment of the discerning I will thwart. Where is the one who is wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God the world did not know God through wisdom, it pleased God through the folly of what we preach to save those who believe. I want to draw your attention to what he said there at the end in verse 21. The world did not know God through wisdom. That means the world did not know God through the wisdom of the world, through worldly intelligence, through just natural genius. That's not how the world discovered the answer to the question, what will you do with Jesus? The wisdom of the world appraises the gospel as foolishness, but Paul says later on in verse 25, the foolishness of God is wiser than men. So you can't appraise the answer to this question through intelligence. Now that doesn't mean, as some propose, that the Bible is anti-intellectual. Christianity is a learning religion. Christianity engages the mind. So it's not anti-intellectual to believe in the Bible. After all, Jesus said this in Matthew 11, come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and you shall have rest unto your souls. Take my yoke and learn from me. Christianity is a learning religion. But being smart doesn't prevent you from believing something that is false. You can be a highly intelligent person with a really high IQ, and at the same time you can be gullible and believe just about anything. There are intelligent people all over the belief system. Intelligent people believe all kinds of world religions. Intelligent people are atheists. Intelligent people are Christians. Your intelligence doesn't determine it. In the words of Mark Twain, the trouble with the world is not that people know too little, but they know so many things that ain't so. That's true. It's not that we know too little, we just know a lot of things that just aren't true. And there are reasons for that can be explained. Let me share 3 with you. One is bias. Daniel Kahneman, who I think just passed away this year, was a very well-known Nobel Prize-winning psychologist. And he studied how people think, and he has a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. And in his book, Kahneman talks about 2 systems that our minds operate on. He calls them System 1 and System 2. System 1 is your immediate thinking, your intuitive thinking. System 1 is like your instinctual or habitual thought processes. It's really fast, and it's easy. It's your life on autopilot. Most of what you do is in System 1. God made you that way. If you had to deliberate over every little move you made in life, life would be exhausting and it would take too long. And so you don't really have to think about how to start the car or how to get to work or how to make your breakfast or how to put on your clothes. You've sorted all of that out and it's programmed into System 1. System 2 is slower, more deliberate, more effortful. It's harder. Takes long time. And System 2 is the system that we use to challenge maybe preconceived notions in System 1. System 2 is what we do when we learn new truths, learn how to do new things. We spend most of our time in System 1. And in System 1, there's this rule that Kahneman talks about in his book, what you see is all there is. That's the rule of System 1. What you see is all there is, and that's bias. You come into the world thinking it's going to operate a certain way. You come into a setting with certain expectations, and generally you see what you expect to see. That's bias. It doesn't have anything to do with how intelligent you are. It has to do with your preconceived notions and your expectations. Number 2, there's the issue of trust. Our world does not work without trust. Relationships cannot operate without trust. We all have to trust one another to get anything done in the world. And we have authority figures that we've decided we can rely upon. The government or educational institutions or parents. We all have our authorities that we believe. We don't have time to go fact check them all, nor do we have the expertise to do that. We go to the doctor because we believe he knows something about medicine and the human body. And we do what he says, even when it's risky, like having surgery. We allow them to put us to sleep and cut us open. Why? Because we decided that we can trust this person due to the educational credentials and where they are and who they operate with and what hospital they're with and word of mouth or whatever it is. But we put our trust in each other. And you're only as good as your authorities because you can't know everything. And a lot of intelligent people believe authorities that don't necessarily back the truth. Again, it doesn't have to do with how smart they are. It's just about who they choose to believe. And then there's the issue of pride. Sometimes learning truth is harder for intelligent people because they happen to be really proud of themselves and they think they're incapable of believing anything that is false. And if you have that kind of conceit, that's going to make it difficult for you also to know the truth. I think a great example of this is the solar eclipse. I don't know how many of you, I'm not asking for a raise of hands, but a lot of you were able to see the eclipse. I looked at it without sunglasses on for like a second and almost went blind, so I decided maybe I should do that. But I was picking Jackson up from school at the time, and I didn't have time to look up at the sky, but it was really fascinating. I saw a lot of amazing pictures of it. When you think about what it takes for a solar eclipse to occur, it's hard not to believe in God. I mean, you really have to work at not believing in God. It doesn't have to do with intelligence, but a mindset. Think about this. The sun is 400 times larger than the moon. But at the same time, the sun is 400 times farther away from the earth than the moon. And so both look the exact same size in the sky. And it's because the sun is 400 times larger and the same time 400 times farther away that when the sun and moon line up, the moon will cover the sun. Isn't that amazing? And here's another thing. We know our universe, our solar system, is slowly moving away, slowly spreading out. Okay, so we live at the exact time in history to be able to see a full solar eclipse. If we were living 1,000,000 years ago, we would not see a full solar eclipse. And millions of years from now, if the earth is allowed to be around that long, it'll be impossible to see what we saw the other day. And it makes you wonder, did God put us on earth at this time? Did He space everything out at just this way so that we could see things like this and know Him through general revelation. I think that that's why it is. I can't prove it, but I believe that. Now, we know I didn't measure the sun. Okay, I just let you know I'm not able to do that. I didn't get in a spaceship and calculate the time it takes to get from Earth to the sun or Earth to the moon. I had to rely on these numbers probably from atheists. I got this information about the size of the sun and the moon and when the solar eclipse would occur. All this information I gleaned from atheists, or probably some atheists. I know that a large portion of the scientific community doesn't believe in God, but they deal with things like this. We look at it, and we're not as smart as they are, and we see God, it's hard not to see Him. They look at it and they say, what's the big deal? It's just coincidence. So what I'm telling you is your answer to the question, what will you do with Jesus, is not going to be settled by your IQ. Okay, let's go to the second thing. Your answer, number 2, does not depend on your strength. There's a lot of powerful people on either side of this issue. Some powerful people accept Jesus, some reject Him. And Paul explains that strength is not going to determine the answer. Look at 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 25. The weakness of God, he says, is stronger than men. And then in the next verse, he says, not many of you believers in Corinth were powerful. Not many of you were powerful. So secondly, your answer is not going to be determined by your strength. Now, what do we mean when we're talking about strength? We're talking about the strength of men, as Paul puts it, strength of human beings, men and women. And it's 3 basic things. We're talking about physical strength, and this includes your youth, your physical strength, your power, your beauty. That would be physical strength. It includes your wealth, your power to exchange goods and services, your ability to pay others to do things that you want them to do. That's wealth. And it will also include your influence, your ability to get people to do things you want them to do, or your ability to lead people in a more positive way. Physical strength, wealth, and influence, that's worldly power. That's what it is. Now, the world's power can't sustain you. Think about this. One of these days, if you have physical strength now, you're going to lose it. You will age. Your health will eventually fail. Your outer beauty will fade. Hebrews 9:27, it is appointed for man to die once. Each of us is mortal. Until the Lord comes, that's the way of the world. Your physical strength is going to fade. Your wealth is going to be handed to someone else. As Paul puts it in 1 Timothy 6, you came in the world with nothing, you're going to leave with nothing. You can't take it with you. And your influence will be gone too. It's pessimistic, but the words of Ecclesiastes 9:4-6 are true. A living dog is better than a dead lion. The living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing, and they have no more reward, for the memory of them is forgotten. Their love and their hate and their envy have already perished, and forever they have no more share in all that is done under the sun. There will come a day when the strength of men will come to nothing. And so, you're not going to be able to answer this question with your strength either. If you're a particularly strong person, or if you're a weak person, it doesn't tell us where you're going to land on the side of the question, what will you do with Jesus? Okay, number 3. Your answer does not depend on your calling. By calling here, I mean your vocation in life, your station in life, your occupation, who you are, how you're respected. Notice 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 26. Consider your calling, brothers. Not many of you were wise according to worldly standards. Not many were powerful. Not many were of noble birth. Now I want you to take note. He doesn't say not any. He says not many. So maybe some in Corinth were really smart. And maybe some in Corinth were really strong and powerful. And there might have been some nobility in the church at Corinth, but not many. That was the minority. Most of them were average intelligence, average strength, and not nobles. Occupation, nobility, station in life didn't determine what people thought about Jesus. Jesus was followed by lepers, tax collectors. He was followed by prostitutes. He was followed by beggars. He was followed by a centurion. He was followed by noblemen, priests, kings. He's the Savior of all and of anyone who will put his or her faith in Him. Jesus welcomes all men and women of every estate, in any vocation, from any place, because His kingdom needs people from all callings, from all occupations, from all places, from all backgrounds, from all races. His kingdom invites them all to share in a part of His world. And we need to see ourselves as unique human beings who have something to contribute to God. In the parable of the talents in Matthew chapter 25, there are 3 men who receive talents, each according to their abilities. One has 5, one has 2, one has 1. You know the parable. So the first 2 do well, but the last one, he's afraid. He has only 1 talent. Maybe he has low ability. He dismisses and disregards his station in life, so he hides the talent until the master returns. When the master returned to settle accounts, he commended the first 2, but he condemned the last one because he disregarded his own station in life. And he didn't use the abilities that he had for God's service. It doesn't matter what your abilities are or what your opportunities are, however high you think they are or low they are. God needs you. Whoever you are, God needs you, the unique you that makes you who you are. Paul compares the church to a body with different members. Not everyone is an eye, not everyone is a foot, not everyone is a hand. We need different members with different functions. 3 times in the New Testament you see the phrase, whatever you do. And each time we're told that whatever it is we're doing, we should do to the glory of God. The first place is 1 Corinthians 10:31. Whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. Then you have Colossians chapter 3, verse 17. Whatever you do in word or do word or deed, do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through Him. And then a few verses later is the third instance in Colossians chapter 3, verse 23. Whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men. So it doesn't depend on your calling, your vocation, your talents, your abilities, your opportunities, your network of friends. Whoever you are, God needs you. That's not going to determine the answer to the question, what will you do with Jesus? So what does? Well, here's the 4th point. Not your knowledge, not your strength, not your calling. Your answer to the question, what will you do with Jesus, depends on faith. And why is that? Well, the reason is because the question is, what will you do with Jesus? And Jesus transcends all worldly wisdom, worldly power, and worldly nobility. Now, if the question were, for example, who's the valedictorian of your senior class? Well, then we would go to worldly intelligence because it's a question of intelligence. If the question was, and we have this question a lot these days in the headlines, should biological men compete in women's sports? How would we determine the answer to that question? Well, we would look at physical strength, right? Because sports is a competition involving the measure of physical strength. And so we'd fall on the side, if we're reasonable, we'd say no. Biological men shouldn't be allowed to compete in women's sports because, generally speaking, women are not as physically strong as men, and this is a physical competition. If the question was, who is the King of England? How would we determine that? We would determine it by birth, because it's a question of nobility in family. It's a question of earthly calling, earthly station in life. Where were you born? What's your biology? But these are not the questions we're trying to answer. We're not trying to answer questions on an earthly plane. Our question is spiritual in nature and has spiritual measures. The question is, what will you do with Jesus? And Jesus transcends all worldly knowledge, all worldly power, all worldly nobility. In fact, Paul says Christ is God's wisdom and God's strength and God's nobility. Look again at the text, 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 24. To those who are called both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. He is the power of God. He is the wisdom of God. He transcends it all. He's above it all. And some of the Jews and some of the Greeks couldn't accept it, and others did. In his commentary on 1 Corinthians, J.W. McGarvey says, God revealed Himself in His crucified Son and was rejected by both classes. The one stumbling at a crucified Messiah whom they regarded as an accursed one, when they expected a regal and victorious Messiah. The other, now he's talking about the Greeks, looking upon crucifixion as a slave's death, regarded salvation by such a one as absurd. But believing Jews saw in Jesus the power of God far transcending all their dreams of an earthly Messiah, and believing Greeks found in Him a divine wisdom higher than all their ideals of truth, goodness, and holiness. Jesus is God's power and God's strength. Paul goes on, 1 Corinthians 1:27. God chose what is foolish in the world. He's talking about Christ there. Christ is foolish in the world, to shame or to dishonor the wise. And God chose what is weak in the world. Again, he's talking about Christ through the world lens. He chose what is weak in the world to shame or to dishonor the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, Christ, even things that are not. Think of Philippians 2, verse 7. He made Himself nothing. He emptied Himself. Things that are not, to bring to nothing things that are, to the noble, to the proud, so that no human being may boast in the presence of God. Christ was considered foolish, weak, low, and despised, and nothing. He puts the world's greatness to shame. In other words, His nobility is so great that kings fall to His feet. He is King of kings and Lord of lords. So what will you do with Jesus? Paul says it's not going to be your intelligence. It's not going to be your power, your influence, your wealth, your physical strength. It's not going to be your station in life, your calling, your nobility that's going to determine the answer. It's going to be your faith. Look at chapter 2 of 1 Corinthians, verse 5. So that your faith might not rest in the wisdom of men, but in the power of God. Yet among the mature we do impart wisdom, although it is not a wisdom of this age or of the rulers of this age who are doomed to pass away, but we impart a secret and hidden wisdom of God, which God decreed before the ages for our glory. Look at this. None of the rulers of this age understood this. None of them understood this, for if they had, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. The rulers of this age that he's talking about were proud, closed-minded. They thought they already had the world figured out. They could have been very intelligent. We don't know. They were powerful, and they had a high station in life. But they made the wrong choice because they didn't have the humility that was needed. Their hearts weren't open to the truth. They had never listened. They didn't trust the right authority. They had no depth of spirituality. You see, that's what makes the difference. Your faith, your openness to God's Word, your willingness to believe. It's why Jesus said, unless you become like a little child, you can't enter the kingdom of heaven. It doesn't matter how smart you are or how much power you wield, how much money you have. It doesn't matter if you're king of England or king of the world. It doesn't matter. What really determines the answer is whether you can humble yourself as a little child and be open to the right authority. In other words, faith. Getting more specific, it's the object of your faith that determines the answer. And I put it that way because there's not a person on earth who doesn't have some kind of faith in some object. The world is bigger than any of us. Life is too large. Experience is too broad for us to go independently into the world. We lean on someone or something. It doesn't matter what your belief system is. It takes a lot of faith, for example, for an atheist to look at a solar eclipse and say, that came about as an accident. It takes a lot of faith to say this world just came about by accidental evolutionary processes. It takes a lot of faith for a Marxist to think that the government's going to take care of every person, especially after the experiments have been tried through history and shown that they fail every time. It takes a lot of faith to believe in that kind of political system. It takes a lot of faith in academic institutions that have not produced favorable results. Good lessons can be learned, but the information is often faulty and not 100% reliable. Our faith in other human beings is always disappointing because people lie, people betray one another, people stab each other in the back, we hurt each other, we do it over and over and over again. And yet some people, they get through life through relationships with other people, connections. They're all about trying to work the social networks. But in Christ, we have someone that transcends worldly wisdom, power, and station, and glory. He'll never lie to you. He keeps all His promises, and He has the power to forgive sin. So what will your answer be? And asking that question, what will you do with Jesus? We're asking who or what will you put your faith in? Will you put your faith in something of this world? Are you putting your faith in some politics, some other supposed religious leader, another human being, an institution of some kind? Or are you putting your faith in the Son of God who gave up His heavenly estate to come down and live your experience in life, to suffer what you've suffered and more, who gave His life on the cross and rose from the grave on the third day to ascend into heaven to be seated at the right hand of God? Are you going to put your faith in the one who sits in heaven ready to intercede on your behalf? Will you put your faith in Him? It all depends on what you believe, whom you're going to trust. Who will you trust this morning? If you want to trust Him and you need help with that, please come right now as we stand together and as we sing.